Welcome to Inflect, where we discuss navigating the critical inflection points of business and life. These conversations were previously known as Fireside Chats. In this episode, Rachel Lockett and Michael Daehne discuss the innovations and applications of generative AI and unpack the explosive growth of tools like ChatGPT. Rachel is the Chief Information Officer at Pohlad Companies and has worked with Michael and the FlexPoint team on several transformation projects. Here's more from Rachel.
Hey, Rachel.
Hey, Michael, how you doing?
Good. Welcome back. I feel like we just did a fireside chat, but alas, technology has evolved and changed in just a few months. So I'm glad you're back to talk about it.
And I always love talking about technology with you, so I'll come back as often as you'll have me.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thank you. Thank you for joining. And just as background for anyone who saw our chat, I guess it was several months ago, and might be wondering why are we doing this again? In the time since we talked before, Rachel and I both have been kind of going back and forth about ChatGPT, which has definitely captured the cultural zeitgeist and the attention of the world, I think, with how quickly it has kind of grown in its usage. And I think both of us have just been thinking about all the use cases and the ways that this could be used in the enterprise setting. And we did a talk a few weeks back with some folks in your group and thought, hey, this might be good to add this into the fireside chat library. So that's why we're back to talk today about ChatGPT.
Yeah, it's been amazing, the explosive growth. And I shared this story with you earlier, but the way I came to learn about it was a little surprising to me. So my son, as you know, he's a college student, and he called me up one day, and he never calls, he always texts, right? But he actually called me. He said, "Mom, there's this really cool new tool that'll write essays for you. You can put in a prompt and you can tell it how many sources you need it to cite and what questions you need to answer, and it'll write these amazing essays." And so naturally, I responded with a lecture on academic integrity. And and then I didn't think much more about it. And then a few days later, I know a colleague had posted something on LinkedIn about both ChatGPT and Lensa. And I took a minute they tagged me. And so I took a minute to research Lensa, and I, downloaded the app, and I stopped at the point where you had to purchase a subscription in order to create a magic avatar, right? And I said, that just sounds kind of gimmicky, not anything I need, and I don't feel like signing up for something else and putting my credit card number in another place out there. So I just, moved along. And of course, that was all in the second week of December. And the holidays came, and I kind of took a little social media break. And I come back right after the new year and open up LinkedIn, and oh my gosh, like every third post was about ChatGPT. And I was like, oh, what did I miss? So I quickly researched it, and it was after it was really easy, right? You just log in, put in your email address, create an OpenAI account, and start typing in prompts. And it was right as I was coming up with that first prompt that it occurred to me, this is the tool my son called me about. And then I went, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
So it was kind of cool and exciting. And then just the explosive growth, how it went from launch on November 30th to 1 million users in 5 days. Just absolutely stunning.
Well, I don't know if you experienced this too, but like right when it started to kind of really be in the news all over LinkedIn, I, went to try it out. And that was right in the phase when it couldn't handle the usage. And it was like,
Sure.
Come back, try again later. So I almost felt like I was waiting for the debut of a new movie or a fancy new restaurant or something. Like, when can I actually get in? And then I spent some time over a weekend just playing with it. And it's so fascinating. And I think, as we'll talk about, it is kind of bringing into the consciousness or into view this underlying technology that's been there, but making it a little more consumable.
That's the key that we've talked about. So talk about this, where ChatGPT fits in, because ChatGPT itself isn't, the new groundbreaking technology. It's kind of that combination of other technologies that have been in development. But really what they've done is they've made it accessible and consumable to everyone. So as you did before, talk a little bit about, what is really the technology behind it and where it's come from.
Yeah, I mean, I made this comment to someone recently. I think ChatGPT is the thing that CIOs' kids are talking about, generative AI is the underlying tech the CIOs are actually talking about. And so, to your point, ChatGPT is a natural language processing AI model that's trained on a massive data set of text and is really able to then, based on a prompt, generate net new text based on what it perceives to be the way sentences should be structured and the words and the content and all that. And that is the cool shiny object that everyone's playing with and saying, hey, ChatGPT, will you write me a haiku about digital transformation, or will you write me a sonnet about XYZ? But underneath that is just this broader discipline of generative AI, which we've talked about, is really the idea of saying it's not just AI in a pattern recognition way, or there's like clustering models or some of these more traditional kind of forms of machine learning and AI. Generative AI is generating new content. So it's saying, hey, based on all the rules you've set, how you've designed me, the model, to learn, I am going to generate new content based on the prompt. And so in this case, it's all text-based with ChatGPT, but you could think about generative AI generating new music based on a data set of past music, or images. That's really something that there's some other tools like DALL-E you might have heard of, or DALL-E 2, where they're generating new images based on prompts. And that creates all sorts of trademark and deep fake issues and all that. That's a whole nother story. But I think that is to say, the underlying concept of a model being able to generate something new, I think that's really the game-changing piece here that could be useful.
And I think an additional feature or capability that's really exciting is of course it's been trained. It's been ChatGPT itself has been trained for several years, and that's part of the capability, but also the ability, just in my own conversation with it, to refine the prompt. So I put in a prompt and ask it to write something, and then it produces the output back. And I just did this the other day. I said, that's good, but can you make it a little less formal? And it replied and said, okay, how's this? Or another time I said, I'd like you to add in a little bit of an element of this. And it actually replied and said, that's a great idea. Here's another. I felt very validated.
Yeah.
But what I think is important about that, and this gets back to kind of the academic integrity comment from earlier, I think that this is going to change, as a lot of technologies do. They change how we think about learning and education. And just like spell check and some of those things decreased the importance of learning spelling and grammar, sadly, makes me want to cry. But I think this is changing what our children really need to learn, because now it becomes more important to learn how to ask the questions, how to write the prompts, because they've got all of the knowledge in the world at their fingertips. Why make them memorize and learn things that they can get so easily, but where the skill and the true knowledge really lies is in how to write the prompts and how to ask the questions.
Well said. And I think that what's the term? You and I've talked about digital dexterity is a topic we've talked about in the past. And I think of that here of how do we enable and train and empower the humans to interact with the machines or the models, the algorithms, in a way. I think that the idea of how do you ask the right question or write the right prompt is certainly useful for individual users with ChatGPT, but especially as we think about how do we use this technology for enterprise use cases, it's not as simple as just saying we're going to use AI to solve this problem. It's about what's the interaction and the handoff between the thought leader or expert or person who has been doing all of this manually with the algorithm that might be taking over 10% of the process or running with a piece of it.
Right. So you mentioned the practical applications or the enterprise usage. What are some of the practical applications of generative AI, not just ChatGPT, but the concept overall, either that you've seen or that you've started to explore and do work with for clients or elsewhere?
Good question. So there's a few that are almost like, no duh kind of use cases that I think make a lot of sense around chatbots for customer service use cases and content generation. And I can speak to those in a little bit more detail. And then there's some that I think most folks wouldn't immediately think about around code generation and debugging. I want to come back to that in a minute, but I think that's kind of a little bit more of a nuanced use case. But on the chatbots, right? I mean, I was flying home from Minneapolis last Friday night. Flight got diverted to Chicago because of bad weather. So I'm on the plane, immediately open the Delta app to try to get rebooked or figure out how I'm going to get home. And it immediately says, you want to talk? You want to chat with us? So I start chatting with the bot for like 15 minutes before it handed me off to someone. But you can think about that amped up, right? With ChatGPT, not only kind of doing the if then statements and give me this confirmation number, but really making it more of a conversation around the problem trying to be solved in the way that it's communicating with the user. So I think from a customer service center, omni-channel experience, we're going to see a lot more of that in the coming years. I think from a content generation perspective, I mean, thinking about, the house next door for me is for sale. Someone spent time writing a paragraph to describe that house and why someone should buy it. There's a generative AI use case for that to say, based on all these inputs, go write a description that's going to pull someone in and say they want to buy this house. So you can think about that in a commercial real estate setting very similarly.
I was walking down the hall the other day and our communications director stopped me because she had read my LinkedIn post about ChatGPT a few weeks ago. And she said, oh my gosh, it's the greatest thing ever. It's going to make me so much better at my job. Because she explained that in her sort of peer group of communications directors, there are some who are, worried and scared and, oh my gosh, and what does this mean for, our jobs and for, and then the copyright concerns and things like that. And she said, not me. This is going to make me so much more efficient and I can focus on the things that only I can do and get rid of the things that can be automated. And that's, I really think that's the best approach.
Yeah, totally.
But back to the practical applications. What else?
Well, but I think that's you've seen this in the course of your career, and I have too. That's always the case with new technologies. It's not how do you fight it; it's how do you adapt and kind of collaborate with the new technology in a way that's good. So I think the last thing on kind of the content piece, then I'll talk about coding, is I think there's a huge play around knowledge management and knowledge bases here too. I think at a lot of organizations, folks that are new and are onboarding or are in a new role and whatever the case may be, they have a question. They probably go look in SharePoint and do a search or in some wiki or through training materials. You can imagine saying, hey, when you're new to this company, talk to our ChatGPT kind of interface, and it's going to go search through all the knowledge base out there and generate back an answer to your question of how do I submit my expense report or how do I, do X, Y, Z. So I think that's something we'll start to see in the enterprise setting. There's already some tools sprouting up that are really trying to play into that space. And then the last thing that I alluded to is there's some stuff already in flight around using generative AI, not only for writing and generating code, but more so for debugging code. Sure. So so many developers spend so much of their time not writing the code, it's debugging it when it's not doing what it should. And there's a real opportunity there to use the generative AI to basically say, hey, I would have expected this to be in the script or in the code, and I didn't. Go look in line 146 and see if you've got the right variable or the right syntax or that kind of thing in there.
Sure. Or what about documentation and all of those
tasks? Exactly.
The reasons I got out of programming.
Yeah. No more commenting in code if you can get to it all through a generative AI interface. What about in the work that you're doing with Pohlad and your operating companies? Or I'm sure maybe not using it yet, but thoughts about.
Well, we just the stage we're at is I went to our leadership team meeting and just kind of did that same introductory session, educating them. I mean, I even started back at what G, P, and T stand for, and then opened it up and had them write some prompts. And they were kind of blown away. Our chief legal officer was like, I might be replaced pretty soon. She actually asked it to write up a contract for something, and it did a decent job. But yeah, I mean, I think about some of the potential applications. As you know, we own a group of automotive dealerships, and I actually asked one of the leaders there, I said, how long before generative AI can replace service advisors? And, a little moment of panic in their eyes. Or you already alluded to writing the lease abstracts in the commercial real estate, things like that. So I'm pretty excited about the potential future. But as with most things, it's going to take time, and it's going to take that change management and adoption process and people getting familiar with the concept. But that's why I love what ChatGPT has done, is it's made it accessible to everyone, so people can start to get familiar with the ideas. And it's, being built into Microsoft Teams and other tools. They're going to start to see it and be familiar with it. And that's part of that digital dexterity progress and maturity processes. Then they'll start thinking about, how could this actually make my job easier, instead of feeling threatened by it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I was reflecting on this morning, but even in the month or so, however long it's been since we did the talk with some of the IT leaders within your organization, I think we've already kind of started to go from the peak of inflated expectations to the, I don't know what they call it, the valley of disillusionment.
Trough of delusionment, disillusionment. Yeah,
exactly. And some of it is like all these enterprise software companies, whether it's Bing or Teams with Microsoft or Salesforce, they're trying to get generative AI and ChatGPT or Bard or the various tools into the tools as fast as possible. And then some of them are kind of like falling on their face a little bit because of it being early, and still there's so much to evolve. And so I think it's interesting that it kind of has like the world's attention, and the eyes are watching to see how it goes. I think it's going to be really interesting to see over the coming years, as enterprises embrace it, as the software companies embrace it, how they kind of move out of that trough of disillusionment and then get into more.
I think there's something for us to learn from that rapid, explosive growth since launch. I think that, a couple things I asked myself, well, how did they do this? How did it go from, 0 to 1 million users in 5 days? And then it's up over 100 million now, I think, probably way beyond that. I haven't checked lately, but how did they accomplish that when so many other things took months, even years to reach that point? And I think there's a couple of things. First of all, as we already mentioned in the beginning, the ease of access. You didn't have to pay a subscription fee. Yeah, you might have, shown up at a day when it was too busy, but wait a few hours or wait till midnight and you'll be fine. But that low barrier to entry, you don't have to buy an expensive piece of equipment. You don't have to give them a bunch of personal data. You input an email address and you're good. I think that was key. And then the other thing was, when I was pondering this and trying to figure it out, I called up my son and I said, I probably just texted him actually. And I said, hey, you remember that tool you told me about that writes really great essays? And he's like, no, I'm not using it, Mom. Don't worry. I said, no. Tell me where you heard about it. And he replied, YouTube, duh. The viral spread, it spread among the college students, like you said, the CIO's kids. That's how we learned about it. And I think there's something to be learned there as well. So, and then just the fun aspect, the examples of, like, I asked it to write a love note, write a love letter to my husband, and it came up with something really generic. And then I refined my prompt and I gave it a little bit more information about how long we've been together and how many kids we have and what I like about him. And then it wrote something that brought tears to my eyes, So I think that that fun aspect is another piece that we can learn and apply when we're trying to drive adoption of technology tools elsewhere.
I mean, I think just to underscore that, this is something you and I've talked about in some of the various projects we've worked on together, but it's really important that the technology is accessible, consumable, dare I say fun. Sometimes, like, that is not usually how technology transformation looks and feels to employees and customers. It usually feels more like uncomfortable, rush to the finish line, forced change. And so I think that's something we definitely can learn from
And
this.
sitting in a 2-hour training session to learn how to use
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
Yeah, versus like, hey, it's kind of self-explanatory. Go log in and try it.
Yeah.
That probably won't work on a new ERP, but I think being inspired by that and the way we go about transformation efforts is certainly a great lesson to take from this.
So let's talk for a minute about some of the concerns. So what are the weaknesses, the ethical and legal considerations? We started to allude to it a little bit, but what are some of those things that's going to drag it down into that trough of disillusionment and create problems and headaches going forward?
Yeah. I mean, I think the easiest way to describe it from my perspective is there just aren't a lot of guardrails because it's so new. And what always happens is new technology creates the necessity for new counter technologies or guardrails or whatever you want to call it to manage that. And so, the easy examples here are generating images to say, okay, hey Dolly, right? The image generating one. Make me a picture of Michael standing in the middle of the street with an advertisement in his hand for a competing consulting firm, right? Well, I don't want that out there. I want FlexPoint all the way.
Yeah.
So, right. And so that there's all that around how do we protect against those deep fakes or those images that are kind of creating misinformation, so to say. And I think with the text examples, which we've been talking a lot about ChatGPT, ChatGPT doesn't really have a good filter, so to say. It lacks some context sometimes. It has some bias in the data set it was trained on. And so, if I said ChatGPT, what do you think of my shirt today? It might say, terrible, I hate purple. If I asked a human, they might say, oh, it's not my favorite, but you do you,
looks
right?
good on you. Yeah.
Yeah. And so there's things like that where I think the lack of context, the ethical risks around misinformation, bias, and fakes, I think those are a couple.
There's even
things.
accuracy concerns. I mean, I asked it to tell me about, the company I work for, and 9 out of 10 points were accurate, but it claimed that we owned a business we don't own.
Yeah.
And that we were still in a business that we sold 5 years ago. So, there's still some accuracy concern around that as well. But I think people are really mostly concerned about some of the ethical considerations. And how do I know that this is, something that was created by a human versus a machine? And do I care?
Absolutely. Well, I'm excited to watch this and see it evolve and really, like we talked about, see it move from the fun use case that everyone's looking at and playing with, moving towards how are we actually leveraging this in the business setting to kind of drive value. So I think it's going to be a fun journey.
For sure. I'm looking forward to where it takes us and new opportunities that it opens up and makes available. And looking forward to continuing the conversation with you. I can't wait to hear about, the next, the first client that comes along and asks you to integrate or build something with it. I'll be keeping a close eye on that.
Absolutely. Well, hey, thank you so much for your time, Rachel. And probably right around the time we get this published, there will be some new technology or trend out there that will require us to do another one.
We'll do it again. Sounds good.
Thanks, Rachel.
Thank you. Take care.